Hello, esteemed viewers. Greetings to everyone watching us online right now. Today, we have a meeting with Leonid Konovalov. The meeting is titled, Astronauts and Bloopers, or in short, AstroBloopers. The thing is, at the beginning of December, the President-elect of the United States, Donald Trump, announced that he had nominated Jared Isaacman to lead NASA. This is a man who has already gone into space twice. The first mission was in September 2021, and the second in September 2024. This is a photograph purportedly from the 2024 mission. Regarding the missions themselves, open sources tell us that his first mission took place from September 16 to 18, 2021. The crew consisted of 4 people: the crew commander, Jared Isaacman himself, and 3 of his colleagues. This mission is notable for being the first orbital spaceflight in history where none of the participants were professional astronauts. The mission set several other records, as various specialists like to point out in their statistics. First of all, SpaceX specialists emphasized that this was the first private space mission by SpaceX. The crew included the youngest U.S. citizen to travel to space at the time, the first astronaut with a prosthetic, and the first black female spaceship pilot. During the launch of this mission, a record was set for the number of people simultaneously in low Earth orbit. In addition to the astronauts on the International Space Station, there were also Chinese astronauts in orbit. Altogether, there were 14 people simultaneously in Earth's orbit. This mission was called Inspiration 4. So, what is known about it? Billionaire Jared Isaacman, who at the time had a net worth of several $1 billion, paid SpaceX to send several tourists into space. The crew included geology professor Sean Proctor, 51, Air Force veteran and aerospace engineer Christopher Sembrowski, 42, medic Haley Arsenault, and Jared Isaacman, who was 38 at the time. Isaacman made his fortune from retail payment processing for the restaurant and hospitality industry, which formed the basis of his wealth. It's a path somewhat similar to that of SpaceX founder Elon Musk, who also began with the sale of the PayPal service. Here are interesting photos from 2021. Everything seems beautiful. The launch and a few illustrations of that very mission in 2021. It's noted that on this spacecraft, the docking port in the nose section was removed and replaced with a large glass dome to observe outer space and take photos and videos. This is how SpaceX presented the crew members, specifically Jared Isaacman, positioned under that glass dome of the Crew Dragon spacecraft. This is how SpaceX illustrated what it would look like from the outside. But, as far as we know, literally 12 hours after the first publication of this photo, they added that the dome would be used in a historic civilian space mission. That is, it would be utilized. They themselves admitted that this setup was created on Earth to make everything look impressive, as great showmen like to do. However, there are hardly any photo or video records from inside the spacecraft during that Inspiration 4 mission in 2021.
There is a 1.5-minute video, of which 30 seconds are simply showing Earth's cloud cover.
3-day mission. Yet, all the photographic evidence is limited to the pre-flight preparations. How they experienced zero gravity on special aircraft. And that's where it ends. Now, regarding 2024. Here are the hard statistics. The launch took place on September 10th, and it ended after 4 days, 22 hours, and 14 minutes. What else is interesting? This was the second mission for the crew commander, Jared Isaacman. The crew included 3 other people for whom it was their first flight. They were designated as the pilot and flight specialists, as they were called in this second mission. This mission marked the first ever spacewalk by a commercial astronaut in history. That's how they refer to someone who supposedly performed a spacewalk, according to official sources. On the left slide, you can now see the hard statistical data about this mission, which will also be important for us. Here's the famous photo from that flight that circulated across many news outlets. The astronauts' spacewalk in September 2024. What peculiarities accompanied this mission in September 2024? Let's focus on the raw statistical data. At its apogee, the spacecraft reached an altitude of 1,400 kilometers above Earth before descending to 750 kilometers. For non-specialists, these numbers might not mean much, but it's important to understand that the Van Allen radiation belt ranges from 640 kilometers to 58,000 kilometers and is divided into two zones. What's even more interesting is that solar activity intensified during these exact dates, with solar flares occurring on the Sun. No fewer than 15 C-class flares and 1 X-class flare were recorded. These are very serious flares. At the same time, there were extremely strong geomagnetic storms, as shown in the accompanying charts. All this information comes from official, publicly available sources. What does this imply? The radiation environment in orbit was far from suitable for astronauts to perform a spacewalk. For several days at an altitude of 700 kilometers, the astronauts were within the Van Allen radiation belts. It's worth noting that a safe altitude is considered to be around 400 kilometers, where the International Space Station and other crewed spacecraft orbit the Earth. How did everything go? Perhaps the answers to these questions should be sought from various experts, including those who are not directly involved in space exploration but can view the situation from their professional perspective. That's why today we have in our studio Leonid Konovalov, who taught for 30 years at the cinematography department of All-Russian University of Cinematography, 14 years at the Lesnitsa Film School, and now teaches at the Moscow School of Cinema. Is that correct, Leonid?
Yes.
Currently, you are the chief technologist of the State Film Archive and deputy director of the production department at the State Film Archive, correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Leonid, as someone who has seen the video footage of the September 2024 mission led by Jared Isaacman, did you have any questions about it? If so, the floor is yours.
Since I am a cinematographer by profession, I view these video materials from a professional cinematographer's perspective. I've had experience shooting feature films, artistic productions, documentaries, music videos, and commercials. Therefore, I have a clear understanding of how all this is done on a film set. Today, I mainly want to talk about how the Americans allegedly performed a spacewalk without leaving the studio. Specifically, we'll focus on the mission that took place just recently, 3 months ago, in September 2024. This is the Polaris Dawn mission you described in detail. According to official sources, this mission set several world records and conducted over 40 experiments. But in my opinion, the most significant world record was their ability to deceive all of humanity from inside a studio and convince the world that they had ventured into outer space.
A bold statement, Leonid.
2 people performed a spacewalk, Jared Isaacman and Sarah Gillis. Each spacewalk lasted about 10 minutes on average, as stated in the official reports. They were supposedly at an altitude of over 700 kilometers above Earth. But interestingly, in the artist's renderings, they are depicted as completely detached from the Dragon 2 spacecraft. This mission was operated by Elon Musk's company. However, in reality, they only leaned slightly out, no higher than waist level, holding onto a rail. They call this rail a skywalker, some kind of special space ladder. The first thing that catches the eye is that Jared Isaacman holds his hand in one position for 40 seconds, as if he's a puppet unable to move. If you check the timestamp in the corner of the video, it shows 40 minutes. That means he entered outer space 40 minutes after depressurization began. We also see Earth in the background, but just 4 minutes later, Earth disappears entirely. It's unclear where they performed this spacewalk. Somewhere in a vacuum, apparently.
In terms of the foot constraints.
In the video of the spacewalk, all we see is his back.
ED1, when you have time, if you'd like to return to the reach demonstration, we'll take a look at that with the live video.
There's absolutely no way to confirm who is actually out there.
Readout is 5.3 psi, 47% RH.
After watching these videos, I concluded that they utilize simple, basic cinematic techniques that date back to the 1930s. For example, here in the image, you can see how certain scenes were filmed for the movie Cosmic Voyage, directed by Vasily Juravolov, Mosfilm, 1935. This film was advised by Konstantin Tsiolkovsky and features many interesting shots demonstrating how zero-G was depicted. On the left side of the image, you see the secret revealed. The actor was suspended on a cable. To keep the cable out of the camera's view, the camera was positioned below the actor, so their back would obscure the cable. A crew member off to the side would adjust the actor's height, pulling them up or down, creating the illusion that the actor was floating in zero gravity. We can examine a more detailed example of zero-G simulation in the remarkable 1957 film, Road to the Stars, directed by Pavel Klushantsev, a color film produced by Len Nauch Film.
Leonid, is Pavel Klushantsev the one who inspired admiration among Hollywood directors, including those who worked on the famous Star Wars films and similar productions?
Yes, and he also directed Planet of Storms, which was later re-edited to replace Soviet actors' credits with fake American ones, as if they had been in the original film. But in some scenes on the spacecraft, Russian inscriptions were still visible. What should we focus on here? We see two cosmonauts in the shot, appearing to float in zero gravity. You can spot the suspension cables, and below them is the cinematographer. Let's take a closer look.
Hold on. Thank you for this photo.
Around the camera lens, there is a ring mechanism allowing the camera to rotate on its axis. There's also a recessed floor to enable low-angle shots. What's interesting about this shot? Since the actor is suspended, they are, of course, wearing a harness to support their body. However, due to the force of gravity, their arms and legs still hang downward. If you look closely at the top left corner of the image, you'll see the actor hanging with their arms and legs drooping. Why am I focusing on this particular still? Because now I'm going to show you a film clip. To prevent the actor from swaying on the cable, they had to hold onto a bracket at all times. When we examine footage from the 2024 Polaris Dawn mission, we'll see the exact same techniques and devices being used. Next, let's look at a scene from the film. Two of our cosmonauts are in zero gravity, and one is connecting two sections.
астронавты, точнее наши космонавты, находятся в невесомости. И вот один закрывает рукою, люк, соединяет две створки.
However, because we know the actor is suspended by a cable and his body hides it, he cannot fully connect the sections since the cable gets in the way. As a result, there is an editing cut at this moment. He begins to move the sections closer, then snap, a cut. Exactly the same principle can be seen in the mission with Jared Isaacman.
Show us the film already.
Let's go. This is a soundless clip. We see a cosmonaut in zero gravity. It looks very convincing. In the background, extras are simulating activity. The sections are moving closer together. And right at that instant, there's a cut. This film is interesting because it depicts zero gravity inside a spacecraft. This shot is similarly filmed from a low angle, with the actor suspended. It's not hard to deduce where the cable goes. You've probably guessed that if it's currently behind the actor's back, the cable runs into the corner of the frame. Consequently, the actor can only move away from the camera into the depth of the frame, toward the set's corner. We can see that now. Here's a very interesting continuation of the shot, and I'd like to draw attention to the following detail. The first cosmonaut floats past the second. Now, I ask you to focus on the fact that the cable is currently above the second actor's head. We'll see that the first actor almost completely blocks it, leaving the second actor no choice but to grab the cable with his right hand and pull it aside. This means the cable runs above his head, and when the first cosmonaut descends, the second grabs the cable and moves it over. In this video fragment, as a cinematographer, I can clearly see where the cable runs, and I hope that after my explanation, you will see it too. Let's play the clip.
What is this? The man is flying. Well, of course, the weight has disappeared.
He moved into the depth of the set. Now watch carefully. Pay attention to the second cosmonaut's hand.
What happened? What caused the zero-G?
Did you notice?
Yes, his hand moved away just now.
Yes, he pushed the cable aside with his hand, as it was near his face. Now, we'll watch this fragment again, but this time focusing on other details. Which ones? The straps. Since the actor is hanging upside down, he is naturally secured with safety straps to prevent him from falling out of the seat. In this shot, he unfastens the straps. If he is hanging back upward in the seat and unfastens the straps, where should the freed straps move? They should dangle downward, meaning they'll point toward the camera. Let's watch. At the beginning of the shot, he unfastens the straps. The straps fall downward, indicating that this shot is filmed from a normal angle. Now, the straps are swaying on the left side of the frame. These straps are pointing downward toward the lens.
Leonid, once again, what year was this filmed?
1957. Can you see it? He pushes with his hand. Now we'll see that the footage shot by the Americans in 2024 pales in comparison to Pavel Klushantsev's work. But the same signs are present, dangling and swaying straps pointing toward the camera lens. We'll see this now. Additionally, since the Polaris Dawn mission involved spacewalk, in Pavel Klushantsev's Road to the Stars, there's also a spacewalk. Let's see how it was filmed.
Time to test the spacesuit. Nervous? Give me a hand with it.
The second cosmonaut goes into zero gravity and now exits through the hatch. And of course, you've guessed it, he is suspended upside down.
And here we see the very first spacewalk.
Essentially, he is descending.
In his pressurized suit, he has brought with him into this terrifying abyss a fragment of familiar earthly climate. A void, not the slightest trace of atmosphere, and thus silence. Complete, eternal silence.
The rotations around the torso were well captured. Very interesting harnesses are used here. The Americans couldn't even replicate this. Their actor is simply hanging under the studio ceiling. They film him from below, and he barely moves his arms. Let's take a look at what we see here.
Leonid, first an important question. Where did you get the footage we're about to watch?
I downloaded it during the live broadcast.
During the live broadcast of this very mission that was streamed worldwide?
Yes, it lasted an hour and a half. I extracted several fragments from it.
All right, let's continue.
Look here. The actor is suspended on a cable, but everyone starts looking for the cable at the top. The cable isn't at the top, it's at the bottom. To explain how he performed the spacewalk, I filmed a toy astronaut using a model. Watch. Just like Isaacman, he sways slightly as he exits the hatch, holding onto nothing, freely turning left and right.
You overdid it, Leonid. The Earth is visible.
The trick is that the entire shot is filmed upside down. The actor dangles slightly left, right, up, and down on a cable. Assistants use a winch to gently raise and lower him.
Could it really be that simple?
Yes, watch. We flip the frame. It's exactly the same. Gentle swaying left and right. They simply made the cable dark so it wouldn't be visible, thin steel wires. Isaacman's arm hangs down. People constantly ask why he's always standing like that. He's upside down, his arm hangs down naturally, and it involuntarily drops under the force of gravity.
His right leg is almost always motionless, only one leg moves.
Yes, because the cable runs near his leg. There are many interesting details to pay special attention to. For example, at the very beginning, at 1 minute and 17 seconds, they start opening the hatch to release air. The thing is, in this mission there was no airlock. They simply opened the hatch and immediately went into outer space.
A reliable design.
Well, yes. Reliable for a film studio, but entirely unreliable for real spacewalks. Since the astronaut is actually hanging upside down, he holds onto a bracket. Look at the person on the left. His arms are dangling, and to keep them from hanging down, the actors constantly rest them on something. The arrow is now pointing to the safety harness. It swung and then hung back, pointing upward. See, the arrow points to the hose. It's rising up, but they're actively pulling it down. Now pay attention to the hose. In reality, the air-supplying hose is dangling downward. Someone pulled the safety harness by hand. It swayed and came back under the force of gravity.
вернулся назад под действием силы тяжести.
Physics, 6th grade, right?
Exactly. It's that simple. To avoid swinging around in the frame, the actor has to hold onto the bracket. Now, here's a very interesting moment. Finally, it's time to fully open the hatch and step into outer space. But we understand that, from our perspective, the hatch is in a strange position. It's tilted to the side and is quite heavy. The exit is already open. How is the hatch opened? After all, this was a live broadcast. But they didn't show it. The thing is, this is the hatch's stable position because if you flip the frame to how it really was, you'll see that the hatch is resting against the wall on the left. So, under the force of gravity, it tilts downward. On the right, there's an actor portraying an astronaut, probably one of the so-called astronauts. To keep their hands from dangling, they pretend to be typing something on the computer for a long, long time, either sending texts or something else.
You've got to keep busy somehow.
Yes, because otherwise, his hands would have been hanging down. Now we see that at the 35th minute, the hatch is still closed, but by the 37th minute, it's already open. The most interesting moment, how the hatch was opened, was not shown. They cut away at that very moment. For a couple of minutes, they showed meaningless footage of the room, where nothing was happening. Then suddenly, applause erupted, signaling that the hatch had just been opened. And so, at the 37th minute, the hatch was open. It's similar to me saying, I'll show you how I jump across a 10-meter wide abyss. Someone might say, that's impossible. That's more than the world record. I respond, go ahead and film it. They film me as I run and run, then cut to spectators shouting,
It's incredible! Oh my God! Oh!
Finally, they show me already standing on the other side of the abyss, as if I jumped across it. That's about how the Americans present it. They show the closed hatch, then 2 minutes of the audience, followed by,
It's incredible! Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh!
And that's it, the hatch is open. I recognize cheap cinematic techniques here. The reaction shot. They didn't show the event itself but used the audience's reaction to convince the entire world that the hatch had indeed been opened.
We probably still have straps to review, aside from the hoses.
Yes, let's look at the hatch before moving on to the straps. Since the hatch is being opened, all the air should immediately rush out. However, it takes a long time to open it. When we flip the footage upside down, we can see that Isaacman, or whoever is in his place, is slightly lifting the hatch, but it falls back down under the force of gravity.
Is anyone holding it?
No, but the hatch is heavy and hinge. The astronaut slightly lifts it, let's go, and it falls back on its own. Then he lifts it again, lets go of his hands, and the hatch suddenly drops down. This isn't a 180-degree rotation. He lets go, and the hatch suddenly drops down. From the angle of the dangling straps, it's clear that the tilt is not 180 degrees but closer to 160 degrees. Now, let's look at footage actually filmed in zero gravity on the International Space Station. Notice, first of all, that they use their feet to grip handrails so they don't drift away. Most importantly, there's the moment of inertia. If someone pushes off, they'll start moving forward.
You could see that the Japanese astronaut started spinning and shifted from his initial position.
It is impossible to abruptly stop and start moving in the opposite direction. However, in the Polaris Dawn mission, we see objects moving back and forth on their own. Here, I simulated the spacewalk. Isaacman is on the left, and Sarah is on the right. We weren't shown how Isaacman exits into outer space. Instead, we were shown a POV shot, a view from his helmet. We'll see that shortly. But they did show Sarah exiting into outer space. Here she is on the right. The problem is that both are suspended, and Sarah isn't centered in the hatch. To exit through it, she needs to reach the hatch. You'll see her stretching out her arm to grab the handle, but she's about 20 centimeters short. Since she's suspended on a wire, she starts swinging left and right as if floating weightlessly around her center of mass. This kind of movement doesn't happen in true zero-G. Eventually, they pull her closer to the hatch using the wire, and only then does she manage to get her head through the hatch. However, since the wire is attached near her center of mass, around her hips or navel, she can only get halfway through the hatch. At this point, the shot is cut. Let's watch. Sarah is trying to exit.
Is this a sped-up recording?
Yes, because she spent a long time fussing about there. Look, she tries to reach the handle with her left hand, but she can't quite reach it. She doesn't have the strength or leverage, she simply can't grab it. This means the crew had to adjust her wire.
The wire operator must have gone for coffee.
Look, she's still struggling. I sped this up twofold because the movements are so slow. She swings around her center of mass, which is impossible in zero-G. In real zero gravity, you'd push off in one direction and move by inertia until you pushed off again. Finally, they pull her closer, but now the hose gets in the way. She tries to tuck it away to keep it from sagging. At last, she gets near the hatch, moves halfway through, and then the wire stops her. The shot is cut, and they show a different one.
Incidentally, when they cut to a new shot as she was exiting from inside, the previous one ended with her boot not fully out of the hatch. This suggests there might have been some kind of attachment there.
Yes, I looked closely, and inside, you can see other astronauts, but there are some inconsistencies. This means that the continuation of the spacewalk was filmed at a different time. It is absolutely clear that this was not filmed live. Moreover, there was a significant interval between the shooting of one sequence and the other. Now we'll take a look at how actors are usually rigged in movies. You probably recognize the actor from the TV series Sherlock. Typically, suspensions are set up in this way. Or take the well-known 2013 film Gravity. The space scenes are excellent, created in a studio with the help of special effects. For example, here Sandra Bullock seems to float weightlessly through the spacecraft. In reality, she's simply suspended, and the camera moves past her. In the film, it appears as though she is moving past the camera somewhere to the side. What's interesting here? Of course, we don't see the rigid, hard harness under her clothes that helps her lie comfortably, supported by wide straps. But I want to draw your attention to the legs. Since legs also dangle, they need to be secured so that the actress doesn't hang in a U shape. So, we see the harness that holds the legs in place. Her hands are free to move, so they can be in different positions. However, legs are heavy and need support. Now, we'll see that the same thing is done in the 2024 Polaris Dawn mission. What do I mean? This is the so-called specialized spacesuit for spacewalks. In the comments, people wrote that when air leaves the spacecraft and pressure disappears, there should be some effect of the suit expanding from the inside. As we know, when Alexei Leonov conducted the first spacewalk, even though he was in a semi-rigid spacesuit, his suit still inflated. Here, however, there's not the slightest change visible on the surface of the suit.
Technology has changed.
Yes, but in this photo, I want to draw your attention to the boots. Here, the boots are simply resting on a stand for convenience, while the astronaut is in a crew couche. Now, look at the photo, and we can see that all the astronauts' boots are secured with wide black elastic straps. Let me zoom in. On the right boot, you can see the strap, while under the other boot, it hasn't yet been attached.
Like stirrups for riders?
Yes. But in stirrups, you press down, while here it's the opposite, upward. I haven't investigated this thoroughly, but it seems a bit strange to me. Do our cosmonauts secure their feet during launch?
I'm not sure.
Here's the thing. During rocket launch, acceleration occurs, and gravity presses the cosmonaut down. Legs, chest, head, and the entire body are pressed into the couche. So, why tie down the legs if gravity is already pressing on them? When they return, it's the same thing. Acceleration in the opposite direction exerts strong pressure, pinning them to the couche again.
And your theory about why this is done here?
Why? To prevent legs from dangling during composite filming with an inverted chair suspended from the ceiling. That's my theory. Now let's watch another video clip. At first, I thought, okay, they didn't actually perform a spacewalk. But according to the official data, from September 10th to 15, that is, for 5 days, they were supposedly in outer space, orbiting Earth. So, maybe they did go to space? I downloaded 2.5 hours of the Polaris Dawn re-entry broadcast and watched all of it. Of course, most of the time was filled with unrelated content. For example, random imagery, drawings of Earth, or wide-angle shots of someone sitting at a computer. For the majority of the broadcast, 2 commentators were positioned at the top or side of the frame. They kept talking non-stop, ostensibly to keep viewers entertained, but in reality, to distract them from cinematic bloopers. Their commentary was something like this.
Blah 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 blah
for 2.5 hours straight. So, I'll mute the audio to spare you the blah blah blah, and we'll take a look. From this lengthy broadcast, I've clipped about 1.5 minutes of relevant footage. We'll focus on the same details: straps, rubber fasteners securing the legs, and so on. Since these segments weren't filmed live but prepared in advance, possibly 3 or 4 months before the Dragon 2 launch, carefully staged shots were inserted into the broadcast. 30-second clips were added here and there, one at this point, another 20 minutes later. What we see are rehearsed stunts, prepped and polished for insertion. And now, we'll see it for ourselves. Let's start watching. The arrow points to the fastened straps. Then, notice how the zipper pull slowly moves upward on its own and stops. The person on the right lowers their hands, yet they slowly rise back up. On the left, we see a pre-planned setup. A pen appears to float weightlessly. Because it's tied, it doesn't drift away but hangs on a wire, slowly rising.
The slow pace is key.
In reality, the pen is positioned vertically upward because it isn't rising, it's actually dropping downward. But you might think, how smoothly that pen glides. It must be 0G. No way could a pen drop so gently in real life. This effect is just action slowed down threefold. If you speed it up by 3 times, it looks like ordinary swaying. And most importantly, while we were watching, I didn't have time to explain where that pen came from. It was in a pocket. Should we rewind and point it out again?
Let's give it a try.
Let's go. Where did the pen come from? The pen was in a small pocket of a bag. It had been placed there, and then the woman let go of her hand, and the pen began to rise on its own, attached to a wire. Now you will see this pocket. Look at the person on the right as their hands move. The zipper pull went up. Now watch the woman, the actress astronaut.
We saw the hands on the right.
Now look as she lowers the pen into the pocket. The pen came out of there. There's a small, narrow pocket where it was stored. She lowers her hand, and the pen or pencil slides out of the pocket on its own.
Are you saying she was just holding it in place?
Yes, and then, under the influence of gravity, the item smoothly slid out.
On a reinforced wire so it could be controlled like a puppet string?
Yes, so it wouldn't just hang vertically downward like on a string but could sway.
So, this is almost like cartoon puppets on wires?
Maybe, yes. If you speed it up, you can see how she just tugs and shakes it. 1, 2. Look at the zipper pull in the middle of the frame hanging vertically. It's swaying left to right.
So, the zipper pull is facing the camera right now.
Yes, vertically. If you flip the frame, you realize the zipper pull is swaying under the influence of gravity. It's always swinging around a central position. I see the same techniques and small details here, that clearly show this was filmed on Earth in a studio, with gravity present. It's absolutely clear that all of this was shot in a ground-based studio. At first, I thought, well, fine, they didn't go on a spacewalk. Even though people are saying the spacesuits look too light, not very real or authentic. Fine, it's an achievement to create super lightweight spacesuits for spacewalks, 22nd century technology. But then you start noticing other details and think, my God, everything from start to finish was filmed in a studio. You mentioned the mission Inspiration 4 from 3 years ago. I specifically looked into that mission. I thought, maybe at least something there was genuine? That mission deserves a separate discussion about the cinematic tricks they used.
Today?
No, it's just that the question of spacewalks is so fascinating, and has been subject to so much falsification by the Americans, that it deserves a separate discussion. Today, I'll simply provide a historical overview on the topic of spacewalks and share a few brief facts without taking up too much time.
Yes, please.
Now, I'd like to show you this group of 4 brave non-professional astronauts who by now have probably become professional actors. Here's footage of them training to pass through the hatch. They practiced working on suspension systems, one person and then another. The suspension wouldn't go upward, though, it would later be flipped, positioning them head down instead. We're led to believe it's surely a spacewalk, but in reality...
Could you go back 1 frame? Have you ever come across any footage of these non-professional astronauts from the American side training? For example, in a pool?
Yes, I saw Sarah jumping into a pool. She was standing on a platform, then jumped, just like that, into the pool. I didn't see any underwater footage, but I did see her jumping into the water. There are also clips of training in an aircraft, which you've shown. So, they did a bit of training to say, yes, we've experienced what zero gravity feels like. But if you look at these clips, there was a lot of anticipation. There was significant promotion about them going on a spacewalk. But in reality, they were suspended in a head-down position like this. And since during the spacewalk, we don't see a single face, not Isaacman's, not Sarah's, I suspect that maybe when they were suspended on wires, it didn't look very convincing. So, they brought in a circus performer, and not once throughout the footage did they show their face.
So, there might have been a stunt double for them as well?
Possibly. Imagine if you claimed to have climbed Mount Everest and took a selfie from behind without showing your face at all. It's the same kind of selfie in space, no face visible. Who was it out there? I don't know. At first, I even thought that maybe the roles of Isaacman and Sarah were played by the same actor, but upon closer inspection, no, it was two different people. They differ in height. Isaacman is very tall, while Sarah is significantly shorter. So, there were two different actors. Here they are, celebrating having fooled all of humanity and setting a new world record by convincing everyone they went on a spacewalk. What immediately catches the eye? When Alexei Leonov became the first person in the world to perform a spacewalk, he used the inflatable airlock chamber Volga. To avoid depressurization, Leonov first entered the airlock. The hatch below him was closed. The front hatch was opened, and he exited. This ensured that the spacecraft itself was not depressurized. If we look at the space shuttles, they also have an airlock chamber, depicted in this diagram as a cylindrical device near where the legs are visible. The shuttle has a massive cargo bay, and astronauts exit into it via the airlock. Interestingly, I've included a quote from Alexei Leonov when he performed his spacewalk. His very first words were, "Zarya 1, this is Almaz 2, I'm at the edge of the airlock, just peeking out of it. I feel great. Below me, I can see the Caucasus. I see clouds, the sea, and we've just passed over the Caucasus mountain range." In other words, Leonov described what he could see on Earth. What did the astronauts see? Nothing. Moreover, we were even shown what astronauts supposedly see through their helmets. Inside, near their heads or temples, there was a camera capturing their perspective. Here's an image of what Isaacman saw during his spacewalk. A so-called subjective shot, or, as we call it in filmmaking, POV, point of view, showing what the character sees. Could he have said, "I see the Caucasus"? No, the location was deliberately chosen to avoid any identifiable landmarks. At that moment, the spacecraft was supposedly flying somewhere between Australia and Antarctica over the ocean. There was no way to discern what was below. Complete darkness, just ocean, with no visible landmasses. We saw Sarah exit the hatch earlier. Now let's look at Isaacman's exit.
The grand culmination of this entire sequence.
Yes, the main event. As you've probably noticed, the actual passage through the hatch wasn't shown. It's difficult to position two actors simultaneously in the center of the hatch, so they simply showed him lifting himself up and immediately switched to a POV shot, a view from his perspective, through his helmet. What's interesting is that in the corner of the frame, we see his hand gripping a rail, and the camera captures this. Take note of the time, 38 minutes and 16 seconds. This was a live broadcast, 38 minutes and 16 seconds in. At this point, they cut and continued filming from a different angle. Here, we see him gripping the handle with his fist, but in the next shot, he's holding it with his fingers. Look, I've zoomed in. This was at 38 minutes and 16 seconds, happening within fractions of a second, meaning he didn't have time to adjust his grip. In the first shot, he's gripping the handle with his fist like this, and in the next, he's using his fingers. These two shots were filmed at completely different times and are entirely unrelated. Now moving on. How is a spacewalk typically shown? On the left is an image of Leonid Spacewalk. He was filmed by two television cameras, one inside and one outside. The external camera captured this footage. In the image on the left, you can see a protrusion on the right where a 16mm film camera was mounted, enclosed in a special box to protect it from external factors. So, his spacewalk was filmed by three cameras, two television cameras and one film camera. How is this broadcast on Intervision? I started researching, and it turns out that when Leonid performed his spacewalk, Intervision was activated, and part of his spacewalk was broadcast live via Intervision to many countries. What about astronaut Edward White's first spacewalk? The Americans showed it as a cartoon, drawn with pencils. I'll show you a fragment of the broadcast.
What year was that?
1965.
As a point of curiosity, in earthly terms,
They show the flight path somewhere over Mexico.
the point of the day was the conversation between ground and capsule as White.
Then the broadcast is interrupted by interference, and now we'll see the live feed with a voice from space. And now comes the video.
Everything is clear.
Here comes the image.
This is what it was.
In the live broadcast, a pencil-drawn cartoon. But at least the voice isn't from the next room, it's coming straight from space.
Do gentlemen take their word for it?
Yes. What's the deal here? The thing is, when Alexei Leonov performed his spacewalk in 1965, it was a shock for the Americans. They were unprepared. They said, in 2.5 months, we'll do it too. It was during the Gemini mission, with 2 astronauts. They said, to make sure NASA doesn't know, we secretly trained at night for spacewalks. It was a whole science for us, how to design the camera, how to do this, how to do that. They said, we'll secretly open the hatch without NASA knowing and step out into space ourselves.
That's how we always do everything.
This is how Americans do things. This is Gemini 4, and on Gemini 9, the scriptwriters came up with even more absurd stories. For example, when Alexei Leonov conducted his spacewalk, his pulse was around 150 beats per minute. His heart was racing. But for Gemini 9, they claimed, we went into outer space, and it was so calm and peaceful that we fell asleep. When I was in outer space, I dozed off, and so did my partner, who was also in a depressurized environment.
A calm atmosphere, just another day for us.
Suddenly, 20 minutes later, NASA called us, wake up, wake up. Oh, how we napped in outer space. Meanwhile, for us, it was nerve-wracking, no one knew what to expect. The Americans had nothing ready for spacewalks. They couldn't show anything, so they aired a cartoon. Then, for several months, they worked on a setup to imitate a spacewalk. The main trick for creating the illusion is well known from space films. For example, here's a shot from the movie Destination Moon, 1950. The spacecraft is flying to the moon. The actor puts on magnetic boots and walks down a vertical wall. We understand, of course, that the trick is incredibly simple. Everything is filmed in a studio, and the frame is simply rotated 90 degrees. This is Edward White, who supposedly performed a spacewalk 2.5 months later. And if we look closely,
The letter U?
yes, he's hanging on wires. What's interesting, and it may not be very clear, is that his hose and ribbon are hanging down. The ribbon is extending horizontally to the right. If we rotate the frame 90 degrees, we can see that the ribbon, under the influence of gravity, simply hangs down, while the actor is suspended in the posture of a window washer. That's how window washers are suspended. In this case, the wire goes vertically upward. This can be discussed in detail. I wrote 9 articles specifically about the spacewalks on Gemini 4, where I thoroughly analyzed the design, the lens used, and the shooting distance. A projection of the Earth was displayed on a cinema screen behind them. However, to ensure no one caught on, no continents or islands were visible, just constant cloud cover. This cloud cover was filmed from a high-altitude aircraft using an ultra-wide-angle lens, which distorted the horizon. White's spacewalk lasts 9 minutes. To avoid suspicions and ensure no one could make claims later, in those 9 minutes, we never saw anything recognizable on Earth. Like, you were flying over Hawaii, but we know it was sunny and completely cloudless that day, yet you showed clouds. So, in 1965, there was constant cloud cover, and here, in 2024, to prevent any complaints, they just went with plain blackness. I wrote a book titled, When the USA Admits They Didn't Go to the Moon, where I analyze not only the lunar surface footage and demonstrate that it was all filmed in a studio, but also delve into earlier missions. Before Apollo, there were the Gemini missions with 2 pilots, and before that, there was Mercury. I argue that all the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions were fabrications. Initially, I didn't believe this and didn't want to believe it, but I've come to the conclusion that the first time Americans truly repeated Yuri Gagarin's feat and reached low Earth orbit, achieving the Earth orbital velocity, was on April 12, 1981, with the Space Shuttle. That's 20 years later. Before that, they were solely engaged in cinematic productions. Their rockets would launch but didn't reach orbit because their launch vehicles were very weak. They achieved speeds of only 2 kilometers per second, which isn't enough to reach orbit. You need 7.9 kilometers per second. The rocket would ascend, spend a few minutes above the Kármán line in space, and then splash down into the ocean. I've written numerous articles about Apollo mission spacewalks as well. For example, the image on the left shows an astronaut performing a spacewalk in 1972. You can see his legs lifted upward. I rotated the image on the right, and now it's clear that he's hanging on a wire, simply holding onto a cylinder meant to imitate the Apollo spacecraft.
Low-budget stunt.
The most telling sign of fabrication, however, is their over-eagerness to prove zero gravity in every shot. To do so, they'd toss plaster or foam. I'm not sure what exactly. See the white speck in the corner of the left image? I call it plaster for convenience. These white fragments were floating upward. They claimed this wouldn't be possible on Earth. I rotated the image and added a red arrow. You can see two positions of the fragment. Now it's evident that the fragment is falling straight down, just like the astronaut's suspended body. The Apollo spacewalks, in particular, are nonsensical. Why conduct a spacewalk in the middle of the journey between Earth and the Moon? It doesn't make sense. Spacewalks on Earth's orbit, where tracking stations monitor you, might be understandable. But they claimed to step out mid-journey to retrieve a camera supposedly mounted outside. When I examine these Apollo 16 spacewalks, it's clear they were just trying to prove they were in zero gravity. To create the illusion of slow movement, they threw pieces of foam. The foam would fall downward, but because it was light and encountered air resistance, it fell without accelerating. To keep it stable and prevent it from wobbling or spinning, they placed a small, lightweight inside. Its large surface area caused it to fall straight down without swinging side to side due to airflow. And here's another interesting point. To further convince the audience and prevent the hose from sagging and revealing the presence of gravity, a magnet was placed inside it. The magnet occasionally attached the hose to the metal cylinder, showing that the hose didn't sag. That's why I immediately see, aha, this is hanging over there, and the pieces are flying this way, it's all clear. The actor clutches the rails with his feet and hands. Then, as the camera rotates, he lets go, and his legs fly upward, standard cinematic tricks.
Revealing essentially all the guides on how to shoot movies.
That's right, I even wrote an entire book where I detail everything. How the moon landings were filmed, which camera was used, and which lens. For instance, they say, there are shots of the lunar module taking off from the moon, filmed with a video camera. I looked at it and said, there was no video camera, it was a 16mm film camera. The lunar module didn't actually take off. It was suspended from the ceiling. After a firecracker went off, it began falling downward. The film camera captured the fall at about 200 frames per second. Later, the footage was played back normally, making it appear as though the upper part of the lunar module was slowly ascending. It's clear it was a model. I can even determine the scale, 1 to 10. Hollywood typically uses 1 to 6 scale models, but for these particular shots, a 1 to 10 model was employed. By analyzing the lunar surface footage and understanding how it was created, I can say that the Apollo 11 mission, scheduled for July 1969, was filmed 2.5 years prior to its release. That means filming started in 1966, with intense shooting occurring in 1967. How did I determine they filmed 2 years in advance? Because of Stanley Kubrick, his technology for projecting a lunar mountain onto a large movie screen wasn't yet ready. But that's a separate topic. In short, understanding film production, we know that, say, when a film with Keanu Reeves is shot now, it won't be released for another year and a half. It's roughly the same process. This isn't 1909, when a film was shot and shown the next day. It takes about a year and a half. That's why the footage from the Polaris Dawn mission, which we're analyzing now, couldn't have been shot just a day or two before. It was filmed several months before the scheduled mission. Pre-prepared clips, like the pencil floating out, were inserted here and there to fill the runtime to about 90 minutes. The 2.5-hour Polaris Dawn re-entry was interspersed with short clips. These prepared segments were shot months in advance, maybe even a year, but certainly not less than several months before the mission. Now I want to show you the shuttle Challenger. You can see the inscription Challenger on it. The first shuttle flew in 1981, and to overshadow our Cosmonautics Day, they specifically scheduled the shuttle's first mission for April 12, 1981, exactly 20 years after Yuri Gagarin. When asked, when do you celebrate Cosmonautics Day? They say, April 12th, because that's when our shuttle went to space. This is another shuttle, Challenger, on its STS-6 mission, its first flight in 1983. During this mission, astronauts made an actual spacewalk. You can see the hatch of the airlock leading to the large cargo bay. This was April 1983. The two astronauts you see here are Donald Peterson and Story Musgrave. These are the astronauts who performed the real spacewalk in 1983, 18 years after the achievement of our Alexei Leonov. There were special handrails and tether hooks, and they went out together, one securing the other. This was a real spacewalk. Interestingly, they used a suit called the EMU, Extravehicular Mobility Unit. This suit weighs 115 kilograms.
Is that important?
Why is it important? Because we just looked at extravehicular activities during the Apollo missions in 1972, and their suits weighed only 48 kilograms. Other sources, such as Alexeyev's book, Spacesuits, Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, mention a weight of 54 kilograms.
For astronauts?
Yes, the suit itself weighed 22 kilograms, with the life support backpack adding another 26 kilograms, totaling 48 kilograms. But the Apollo suits were just props. When it came to actual spacewalks, the suit turned out to weigh 115 kilograms. You can compare the size of this suit to an astronaut. It's massive. If we summarize everything said, we can draw the following conclusion. The Americans used cinematic techniques to convince the world that they were at the forefront of space exploration, going nose to nose with the Soviet Union's achievements. In reality, they lagged far behind. For example, in the case of spacewalks, the gap was 18 years. Alexei Leonov made his spacewalk on March 18, 1965, while they did so in April 1983, almost exactly 18 years later. The fact that Jared Isaacman was recently appointed as the head of NASA, despite simulating 2 missions in a studio, indicates that both NASA and Elon Musk are firmly committed to fabrications. There will be no real missions, instead, there will be impeccably crafted computer graphics. Modern CGI is so convincing that whenever possible, footage will be replaced with computer-generated images. In scenarios where the audience cannot discern the difference, like simulating zero-G, they will use shaky cameras, pan to the left, show a face for 5 seconds, then cut to a hatch with Earth visible, as they did during the Inspiration 4 mission. I specifically analyzed this. The footage was shot with a swaying camera, making it hard to make out details. Usually, when the ISS demonstrates zero-G, what do? They hold a microphone, then let go, and it floats in midair. While reviewing the Inspiration mission, I noticed that in addition to the techniques we mentioned, every object was tied down. For instance, the Snoopy toy, or whatever it was called, hung on a springy wire. A pencil was attached to a wire. Even a bag containing some bandages hung on a wire. There wasn't a single shot showing an object floating freely across the frame. Everything was tied with strings and dangled. If you rotate the footage by 160 or 180 degrees, it becomes evident that all objects sway under the influence of gravity, moving like pendulums. An analysis of the Inspiration mission makes it clear that they were obsessively focused on that toy. They kept pushing it to make it sway and simulate zero-G, as if to shout, "Look, it's zero gravity, look." But the Inspiration 4 mission also featured something new. A woman pulls out some bandages. They connected tubes of compressed air to them. The bandages sag downward under gravity, but an airstream from below makes them curl upward. These simple tricks are obvious to someone with experience in filmmaking who carefully watches and understands how such shots are filmed. It's clear that these were just trivial composite shots, not even on par with Pavel Klushantsev's 1957 level but closer to something from before 1950. This is how billionaire Isaacman and Sarah Gillis walked in space.
Thank you, Leonid. Statements have been made. Arguments presented. The question is, why and for what purpose was it suddenly necessary to act so clumsily in September 2024? Approximately a year ago, at the end of 2023, the renowned British magazine The Economist, as part of its tradition, published another cover filled with riddles depicting how it envisions the world's trajectory for the next, now current, 2024. At the center of this puzzle were elections, or at least that's how many interpreted it. At the center of the image, you can see a ballot box with voting slips falling into it. The illustration also features several recognizable figures, including Trump, Biden, artificial intelligence, and, intriguingly, two separate graphical elements related to space. Perhaps this is exactly how we should view it. Artificial intelligence, space, and elections, including those in the US, all significantly shape political events around the world. What else should we take note of? On December 19, 2023, when it had already become clear who would participate in the U.S. election campaign, and Biden had announced his intent to run for another term, Biden and his Vice President Kamala Harris hosted the crew of the upcoming Artemis II mission in the Oval Office of the White House. Here's the photo, December 19th, just a week before their Christmas recess. 2 weeks later, at the start of January, once the media buzz had quieted down, NASA announced potential delays, indicating that the mission might not launch in 2024 as initially planned. Time to align with the election cycle, where the Biden team hoped to leverage the space theme as a favorable angle. A few months passed, and on July 12, 2024, NASA officially declared that the launch would indeed be postponed. No reasons were specified. They cited technical difficulties and delays. Just a few days later, as we now know, Biden penned his withdrawal letter, and Kamala Harris stepped into the race. CNN pushed the narrative that Harris, replacing Biden, managed to close the gap with Donald Trump, who was leading all polls at the time, overnight, and public opinion suggested she might even emerge as a leader in voter preferences. What to do? Could Trump respond in any way? The space race, or at least its visualization in the news, might hold significant sway for American voters. So, what does Trump do? Presumably, he talks to Musk. Come on, help me. What does Musk do? Perhaps something like this. He calls Jared and says, "It's time to step up and make America great again." And the rest is history. In effect, the activities of Musk's network of SpaceX-managed assets helped Trump demonstrate that those working alongside him could actually accomplish something. What and how? Today, we've heard an intriguing account from Leonid. We must also understand that SpaceX isn't just about space flights, it's about making money. Recently, in December, their sources reported that since August, SpaceX, through its Starlink satellite communication service, has been providing secure communications for Ukrainian armed forces. To the previously supplied 500 terminals, the company added another 2,500. These terminals are already operational on site. That's a huge amount of money. Here's the deal. The contract for the initial 500 terminals cost $40 million. Now, with 5 times as many terminals, the prices are undisclosed. All these operations revolve around military budgets and vast sums of money. Take Jared Isaacman, for instance. In the news, we mostly read about him as the founder of a payment service for restaurants and hotels. A brilliant entrepreneur, dropped out of school, started trading, and built an impressive business career. But there's little mention of the fact that for over a decade, he's been making money through one of the first private companies in military aviation. Isaacman owns several airfields and an extensive fleet of foreign aircraft, including models from potential adversaries. His company supports training exercises for the U.S. Army, Marine Corps, and even the National Guard. Among their assets is a 2-seater combat trainer MiG-29, used for flight simulations and pilot training for operations against their military. The company, Draken, holds massive assets. A while ago, they acquired the British company Cobham, one of the world leaders in at least 2 sectors related not just to security but also to military operations. Cobham is renowned for producing cutting-edge equipment for surveillance and tracking, including technology that enables ghost calls to mobile phones, where the user remains unaware. This technology can pinpoint a mobile device's location with an accuracy of up to 1 meter. Cobham is also a global leader in manufacturing rebreathers, closed-circuit underwater breathing apparatuses used by military divers. All of this falls under the military domain, representing colossal financial stakes. These so-called space journeys are primarily about creating cinematic spectacles, as we know from the Anatoly Lunacharsky's memoirs, citing an alleged quote attributed to Vladimir Lenin: "Of all the arts, the most important for us is cinema. Sometimes, the imagery holds more significance than the reality." Once again, thank you to Leonid for sharing his insights. Thank you all, and goodbye. And a big thank you to our viewers for tuning in. Take care.